In September of 2019, Miley Cyrus was performing at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas as part of the iHeartRadio Music Festival. The 26-year-old musician's security team was on alert for 42-year-old David Rumsey, who'd been stalking Cyrus. He'd been placed on the team's watch list for having threatened the pop star in the past. In his most recent tweets, Rumsey announced that he was waiting for Cyrus in Las Vegas and would attend her concert. Some of his bizarre ramblings included saying, "I know after we are together we can party it up with Tupac, Biggie, Prince, Michael Jackson, and all those we lost." Rumsey also said that he wanted one-on-one time with Cyrus, even offering to book a hotel room for the two of them. The singer's security team distributed photos of Rumsey at the concert venue before spotting him in attendance. He was detained and reportedly told the bodyguards, "It's my life's mission to impregnate Miley." Rumsey claimed that fathering a child with her would allow him to fulfill his destiny as Christ incarnate and enable him to raise the dead, including Michael Jackson and Prince. The man, who revealed that he'd been treated for mental health issues in the past, was subsequently arrested for making threats and reportedly issued a restraining order. Number 10. Jenny Contonio. In the mid-2010s, US woman Jenny Contonio developed an infatuation with genius cosmologist Stephen Hawking, bombarding him with messages on social media and via email. Contonio lived in Norway and had reportedly met the lauded professor when he'd visited neighboring Sweden in 2015. A year later, she tracked him down to a science festival in Tenerife, Spain. By then, Hawking's daughter Lucy had become concerned as some of Contonio's messages were threatening, with one reading, "I'm next to you and can kill you." 74-year-old Hawkins' family opted for extra security when he traveled to Spain. They eventually found that Contonio had checked into the same Tenerife hotel and had a detailed itinerary of the scientist's movements. 37-year-old Contonio was arrested and told local authorities that she was lonely and that she loved Hawking. She was quoted as saying, "I figured after a whole year he should be willing to see me rather than get his needs fulfilled elsewhere. Either that or we're over." The woman added that she'd planned to give the scientist one last chance and seduce him by wearing her sky blue Monroe halter dress. Contonio admitted her disturbing behavior, and a Spanish court gave her a 4-month suspended sentence along with an 8-month restraining order, banning her from contacting Hawking or getting within 500 meters of him. Number 9. Adele Rene. Between 2012 and 2016, Scottish woman Adele Rene, who worked as a nurse at Cross House Hospital in Kilmarnock, targeted multiple women online in a twisted stalking and catfishing scheme. At least 10 women were victimized by 27-year-old Rene. The nurse adopted male aliases with associated backstories, had explicit conversations with her victims, and tricked some of them into sending private photos, which she then threatened to release if they tried to end the online relationship. In one case, she accessed the medical records of one of her victims in order to obtain further information. In another, Rene hand-delivered flowers to a victim while pretending they were from one of her aliases. In her attempts to snare the women, Rene used various photos she found online, including those of male model Craig Dunn, and also employed voice-changing technology to give herself a male voice during calls. She was ultimately caught after targeting model and former Miss Scotland finalist Abby Draper. The latter had visited her dying grandfather in the hospital where Rene was working. The nurse approached Draper on Facebook, posing as a fake doctor at the hospital by the name of David Graham. Draper realized that Rene was using a fake profile after she'd connected with 2 more of her friends. The model confronted the stalker and told her she'd contacted the police. Following Rene's arrest, Draper would recount that the nurse was always hovering around her family and following them around. At Kilmarnock Sheriff Court, Rene admitted 10 counts of stalking, 4 of intimate coercion, and 4 of indecent communication. She was jailed for 22 months in order to register as an offender for 10 years. Sheriff Elizabeth McFarlane, described the woman as exhibiting incredibly strange and abusive behavior against innocent people, noting that she'd acted with astonishing precision in a cold, calculated manner. Number 8. Justin Arthur Ray Davis. Leading up to early April of 2021, Oklahoma man Justin Arthur Ray Davis had been stalking a female co-worker in a campaign of harassment that involved leaving sweets and food outside her Tulsa home. After about a month of stalking, Davis attacked his victim on April the 2nd. As she and her husband were walking out of their residence, Davis emerged from a truck armed with a shotgun. The couple retreated into their home, but Davis shot through the front door, injuring the victim's husband in the hand. The stalker then stormed into the building, grabbed the woman, and dragged her down a flight of stairs. Neighbors called 911 after seeing Davis choking and punching the victim while trying to force her into his truck. When the husband tried to intervene, Davis aimed the firearm at him and discharged 2 warning shots in the air, threatening to kill the man if he didn't let him take his wife. Cops arrived in the meantime, and Davis fled without the victim. Both she and her husband survived the incident with injuries that weren't life-threatening. Davis led the authorities on a high-speed chase before crashing into a pole while trying to take an off-ramp on I-44. Davis was taken into custody. He sustained injuries in the incident, with his mugshot showing him with a bleeding face and band-aids on his nose and forehead. He faced multiple charges including kidnapping, burglary, stalking and pointing a weapon with deadly intent. 2022 updates indicated that he'd pleaded guilty to multiple charges, receiving 20 years for first-degree burglary, 15 years for kidnapping, and 15 years for discharging a weapon in a public place. Number 7. Jacqueline Addis. 31-year-old Jacqueline Addis of Phoenix, Arizona, was found guilty of stalking a man with whom she'd only gone on one date. The unidentified victim told the police that Addis had sent him a total of 159,000 messages over the course of less than a year, some of which were violent in nature. Addis found the man on the exclusive millionaire dating app, Luxy. He was a businessman who served as the CEO of a successful company in Paradise Valley. Addis, a beautician, had gone out with him once in the summer of 2017, after which he decided not to pursue a second date with her. The woman proceeded to stalk him for the next 10 months, inundating him with text messages and even showing up outside his house on one occasion in July of 2017. The man called the police following her appearance at his residence, but she didn't stop harassing him and even returned to his home a few months later. It wasn't until May of 2018 that Addis's extensive stalking was brought to its overdue conclusion. She was arrested by Paradise Valley police after being found bathing in the man's tub. Law enforcement also discovered a large butcher knife in the passenger seat of her car. Addis would reportedly send the subject of her obsession more than 500 messages on some days, and in many of them threatened to kill him, going so far as to call herself the new Hitler. The criminal charges against her were eventually dropped after she was found to be mentally incompetent and non-restorable. Her court-appointed attorney revealed her plans to move to Florida and seek treatment for her mental illness. She was permanently prohibited from making any form of contact with the man she was found guilty of stalking. Number 6. Jeremy Kelly. A stalker killed his ex-girlfriend and then took his own life, just 9 days after a warrant had been issued for his arrest. Jeremy Kelly and Rosemary Riley, a pair of 21-year-olds from Ottawa County, Michigan, had shared a contentious relationship leading up to the event that ultimately resulted in both their deaths. After they'd already broken up, Riley, a student at Grand Valley State University, filed a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, which did little to stop him from stalking and threatening her on multiple occasions. Riley notified local law enforcement that she'd been beaten and held at gunpoint by Kelly, also reporting that he'd then started following her around. Despite having knowledge of the assault and the ensuing stalking, the police didn't take Kelly into custody. On November the 6th of 2016, he arrived at the Easttown residence belonging to one of Riley's friends, at which his ex-girlfriend was staying the night. He allegedly dragged Riley outside by her hair in the middle of the night. When she tried to get back inside the house, he fired multiple 9mm rounds at her, killing her instantly. He then turned the gun on himself. In the incident's aftermath, Riley's family took legal action against campus police and Ottawa County Sheriff's deputies, claiming they'd failed to properly protect the victim prior to her murder. The lawsuit also alleged that the warrant for Kelly's arrest hadn't been executed in a timely manner because his father was a police officer. The lawsuit was dismissed by a federal judge in September of 2020. Number 5. Erica Capps. In the fall of 2017, a Florida woman was found guilty of stalking her ex-boyfriend and planting a tracking device on his car. Erica Capps of Sanford had reportedly stalked the man with whom she shared a child for 2 months prior to her eventual arrest. The first incident occurred on September the 19th, when Capps showed up at the Altamonte Springs home belonging to one of the victim's friends. She sent him a text message demanding he come outside. When he obliged, Capps began to berate him for allegedly going to visit a female friend's house. The exact same situation was reported a month later at a friend's home in Maitland, and then again at a Best Buy in Sanford. On November the 8th, the victim saw Capps approaching him at a Walgreens, at which point he promptly left the store. As the man would later tell the police, he began receiving messages from Capps with pictures of locations he'd recently visited. He became increasingly suspicious as to how his ex-girlfriend so often knew of his exact whereabouts. It was then that the victim found a GPS tracking device on the underside of his vehicle and got in touch with local authorities. Capps was arrested and charged with stalking, but she was granted release upon the condition that she ceased all forms of contact with her ex-boyfriend. Number 4. Na Sacko. A 23-year-old woman was stabbed to death inside her Melbourne home in 2020 by a former colleague who'd been stalking her for months. Celeste Mano had worked with Na Sacko, aged 35, at a call center in South Morang before the latter was fired from his position in 2019. Mano, who'd been Sacko's team leader, tried to comfort him following his termination. According to police, the man subsequently stalked his former co-worker for nearly a year after his employment at the call center had ended. He sent her more than 150 messages on social media, prompting Mano to take out an interim intervention order against him. Sacko was soon charged with breaching the order, but he was allowed to walk free. The man's obsession with Mano came to a bloody culmination on November the 14th of 2020. In the early morning hours, Sacko broke into the home that belonged to the victim and her family. Mano was asleep in her bed when Sacko fatally stabbed her. He was arrested and charged with the murder, but sought to circumvent jail time by having a medical professional declare him mentally unstable. Following an inconclusive assessment of his mental state, Sacko requested a second opinion in October of 2021. A pronouncement in that regard is pending, but his lawyer had previously stated that Sacko had no history of mental illness. Number 3. Charles Dean Bryant. In 2016, a man with a known history of stalking women was found guilty of the brutal murder of Jacqueline Vandergriff, aged 24. Local authorities in Grapevine, Texas, first became aware of the situation at roughly 6:30 on the morning of September the 14th. Firefighters responded to reports of a forest fire in Acorn Woods Park. Vandergriff's dismembered corpse was discovered at the scene inside a plastic kiddie pool. The perpetrator had reportedly set her remains ablaze with an accelerant and subsequently fled the scene, although witnesses did tell police that they'd seen a man standing over the fire around the time it was started. It soon emerged that Vandergriff had met 30-year-old Charles Dean Bryant at the Fry Street Public House in Denton on the night before her death. Surveillance footage taken from a nearby Walmart revealed that Bryant had purchased a shovel earlier that day. Consequently, Grapevine police obtained a search warrant for the man's house, where they found the victim's purse inside his trash. There was also a kiddie pool in his backyard that looked exactly like the one found at the crime scene. Bryant's roommate told detectives that there had previously been 2 plastic pools in the backyard. Bryant was then arrested and charged with Vandergriff's murder. The incident took place a mere 4 days after he'd been released from jail, where he'd been detained on charges of stalking his ex-girlfriend. It was speculated that Bryant had targeted Vandergriff specifically because she bore a close resemblance to the woman he'd been stalking. The killer will spend the rest of his days behind bars, having been sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years. Today's topic was requested by I Mesmerize 9, Ms. Faye 13, and Kelly's Homemade Kitchen. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Stanley Ziga. In 2021, an exotic dancer from Fort Worth, Texas, was fatally shot while behind the wheel of a moving vehicle by a 54-year-old man who'd been stalking and blackmailing her. The murder of Abby Saldana, aged 22, was carried out by Stanley Ziga, a regular customer at Rick's Cabaret, the club where the victim worked. Surveillance cameras near the woman's apartment complex had captured Ziga's pickup truck in the area at least 5 times within a 12-day span, indicating that he'd been stalking her in the weeks preceding the eventual shooting. Saldana also discovered a tracking device that had been planted underneath her car less than 2 weeks prior to her death. Ziga had been visiting her at Rick's Cabaret on a regular basis, and according to police reports, he'd threatened to publicly reveal the illicit escort services that she'd allegedly provided him. At about 9 p.m. on October the 26th of 2021, witnesses reported seeing a car speeding down the roadway near the entrance to the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The vehicle then hurtled off the side of the exit ramp and crashed into the grassy area off the side of the road. The driver was identified as Saldana. She was pronounced dead at the scene after sustaining gunshot injuries to her back and arm. Investigators spoke with the owner of Rick's Cabaret and learned that Ziga had been stalking Saldana for some time and that she'd feared for her life. A SWAT unit arrived at Ziga's residence just before midnight on October the 27th. They entered the home to find the man on his balcony with multiple self-inflicted cuts to his arm. While being treated for his wounds, he was arrested and charged with Saldana's murder, having shot the woman from his own vehicle as he followed closely behind her. We will line up our previous release about when rejecting people goes wrong right after number 1. Stick around if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. Michael Lane. Leading up to her murder on August the 25th of 2016, Shauna Grice, aged 19, had pleaded with police to take action against her alleged stalker on several occasions. The victim had become romantically involved with 27-year-old Michael Lane in 2015, when the two worked together in Brighton, England. The man allegedly became obsessed with Grice, who eventually returned to a former boyfriend of hers after ending her relationship with Lane. Following the breakup, Lane reportedly told a friend she'll pay for what she's done. He subsequently placed a tracking device on Grice's vehicle and began stalking her. Members of Sussex law enforcement were first informed of the situation in February of 2016 after Grice complained about Lane sending her unwanted flowers and inflicting damage to her car. Over the course of the next 6 months, the police were notified of 3 additional incidents in which Lane had stalked or assaulted his ex-girlfriend. Officers found that Grice's claims didn't warrant further investigation, and she was issued a penalty notice for wasting the police's time. A few weeks before her death, Grice noticed Lane loitering outside her residence but opted not to report him to the police for fear of receiving another fine. On August the 25th, Lane broke into Grice's home, slit her throat, and set fire to her bedroom. The teenager's dead body was found by her boyfriend's father. Lane was arrested at his place of work later that same day. After a 2-week trial, the stalker-turned-killer was sentenced to life in prison. 3 Sussex police officers faced disciplinary action for their failure to properly investigate Grice's claims against Lane. The victim's parents publicly expressed their belief that their daughter would have still been alive had law enforcement officials adequately performed their duties. A documentary centering on Grice's tragic and arguably preventable demise was broadcast on British television in March of 2021. 31-year-old Lewis Haynes was at the Out nightclub in Pembroke, southwest Wales, on the night of December the 16th of 2021. An oil refinery worker by trade, Haynes started chatting with an 18-year-old girl by the name of Lily Sullivan. Despite the fact that he was in a relationship at the time, the pair left the club separately but then started conversing outside. Haynes subsequently led the teen into a darkened alleyway near a town mill pond. In the early hours of December the 17th, while Sullivan was on the phone with her mother, Haynes began forcing himself on her. She resisted his advances and indicated she'd be reporting the incident to the authorities. The man then flew into a violent rage and, in a bid to silence his victim, strangled her before tossing her body in the pond. As the fatal attack was unfolding in the alley, Sullivan's mother called her phone roughly 30 times, as shown in grainy CCTV footage in which the teen's phone lit up repeatedly while she was being assaulted. Sullivan's remains were recovered from the water shortly after 4:30 a.m. Her cause of death was ruled as strangulation. A few days later, Haynes was arrested and charged in connection with her death. The man denied murder, claiming he'd gone into the water to try and save her before she drowned. Judge Paul Thomas QC of Swansea Crown Court rejected Haynes' defense and ultimately sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years and 4 months. Number 7. Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon was a standout college football player at the University of Oklahoma, where he earned first-team All-Big 12 honors in 2016. He was projected as a first-round talent going into the 2017 NFL Draft, but many experts predicted he might fall to a later round given his trouble in history. Back on July the 25th of 2014, Mixon was involved in a physical altercation with a young woman by the name of Amelia Molitor. According to police records, then 18-year-old Mixon was among a group of friends and teammates outside a restaurant in the Campus Corner area of Norman that night. They allegedly began harassing another group consisting of Molitor and a friend. The confrontation started only hours after Mixon had turned 18, so his buddies began crudely suggesting that Molitor go home with him as a birthday present, even providing specific suggestions for how she should pleasure him. Molitor, who admitted to being intoxicated at the time, initially laughed it off, but she was then followed into the restaurant by Mixon, who continued pestering her. As shown in surveillance footage, the two began arguing and eventually got into a physical fight. Molitor pushed Mixon away and slapped his face, prompting him to punch her, sending her crashing into a table. The young woman reportedly required surgery to repair the 4 broken bones she'd suffered in her face. In the legal proceedings that followed, Mixon entered an Alford plea to misdemeanor assault, maintaining his innocence. He was given a 1-year deferred sentence and was ordered to undergo cognitive behavioral counseling, as well as complete 100 hours of community service. The 5-star football recruit was also suspended for the entirety of his freshman season. Mixon ended up falling to the second round in the 2017 draft and settled a federal lawsuit filed by Molitor in April of that year. Number 6. Joseph Sidle. In April of 2018, a 22-year-old woman from Land O'Lakes, Florida, contacted the Pasco County Sheriff's Office about a man who'd been stalking her. According to the unidentified woman, she'd been approached at her place of work by a strange man who proceeded to ask her out. She turned him down, but he was persistent and asked her a second time. Upon being rejected once again, the man, identified as 62-year-old Joseph Sidle, asked one of her co-workers for her full name. He looked her up on the internet and eventually stumbled upon her address through the Pasco County Property Appraiser's website. Sidle subsequently penned a 2-page letter in which he discussed their possible future together, saying that although she'd said no to his advances, he could tell that she really meant yes. He mailed the letter to the address he'd found, prompting the victim to contact the authorities. Sidle was arrested for stalking, but as of the latest available updates, it's unclear how the case ultimately played out from there. Number 5. Elizabeth Hiley. Florida woman Elizabeth Hiley was entertaining a 25-year-old man at her home in Windmill Village on the night of June the 16th of 2014. Police reports revealed that at around midnight, Hiley told her guest, identified as Crew Finley, that she wanted to have intercourse with him, but he refused. After that, she allegedly became angry and violent. Hiley grabbed a large knife and tried to slice Finley with it, cutting his left thumb in the process. When deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene, they observed Hiley still chasing the young man with the knife, as well as a broken wooden cane. Hiley, who appeared to be intoxicated, complied with the arresting officers and was subsequently booked into jail on assault charges. Number 4. Fanglu. On January the 30th of 2014, an entire family was wiped out during a targeted attack at their residence just outside of Houston, Texas. 50-year-old Mai Yi-sun, his wife Mai Shi, and their 2 sons were found in separate rooms of the house, each of them with bullet holes in their heads. During the ensuing investigation, detectives began looking into a man by the name of Fanglu. The latter, then in his early 50s, reportedly worked for the oil and gas company Cameron International Corporation, where Mao Yi was one of his superiors. Liu told investigators that he'd recently tried to transfer to a better position in a different department within the company, and he asked Mao Yi to put a good word in for him. Liu's bid for the promotion was rejected, and his co-workers allegedly began treating him differently. This led him to believe that Mao Yi had not only refused to recommend him for the job, but also made derogatory remarks that changed the way his colleagues perceived him. Although Liu admitted to being angry with Mao Yi over the incident, he categorically denied any involvement in the brutal slaying of his family. The case languished for the next 8 years with very few developments. Investigators believed that Liu was their man, but they didn't have the evidence to arrest him, and he fled to China in the massacre's aftermath. In September of 2022, Liu boarded a flight bound for San Francisco. Upon his arrival in the States, he was taken into police custody after the authorities had finally linked him to the Sun family murders using DNA recovered from a purse at the original crime scene. Liu faced capital murder charges in the wake of his arrest. Number 3. Robert Scott. 78-year-old Robert Scott from Texas had his unwanted advances rejected by an aspiring model nearly 50 years his junior. On November the 12th of 2016, the man reportedly approached a 29-year-old woman outside a DoubleTree hotel in Kenner, Louisiana. He told her, "You look like a model. We should go out. I can treat you real well." The woman declined, telling Scott she had a boyfriend. Unfazed by the rebuff, Scott then proposed that they enter into a sugar daddy type of arrangement, while allegedly becoming increasingly forward in his advances. The woman told Scott to get out of her face, at which point the elderly man unbuckled his belt and dropped everything, underpants and all, to the ground. He then proceeded to moon the young woman, exposing a portion of his genitals in the process. Scott, who was outfitted in a cowboy hat and blue jeans, was subsequently arrested and booked at the county jail on obscenity charges. Number 2. Ketta Mckin. At around 7:20 p.m. on July the 20th of 2018, Missouri woman Ketta Mckin rode with a female friend to the Speedy gas station at Compton and Chippewa in St. Louis. While the friend ran inside to grab a drink, Mckin reportedly got behind the wheel and took off with her friend's 9-month-old baby seated in the back. The 22-year-old subsequently sent her friend a message telling her she'd stolen her car and infant child because she'd rejected Mckin's advances and refused a romantic relationship with her. An officer who later spotted the stolen car attempted a traffic stop, but the jilted woman refused to pull over. She started speeding and barreled into oncoming traffic before intentionally ramming head-on into a police car. Mckin was apprehended, but the baby was nowhere to be found. The woman admitted to abandoning the child in an alley near South Jefferson Avenue and Arsenal Street. Fortunately, the infant was subsequently found unharmed and returned to his mother. For her reckless outburst, Mckin was charged with child kidnapping, assault, stealing, armed criminal action, resisting arrest, and endangering the welfare of a child. Her bond was set at a reported $50,000. Number 1. Demetrius Pappas. Gunfire broke out at a Santa Fe high school in Texas at about 7:30 a.m. on May the 18th of 2018. The gunman, armed with a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a .38 caliber revolver, first shot up 2 of the interconnected rooms in the school's art complex. At one point, a staff member managed to pull the fire alarm, triggering a campus-wide evacuation while the shooter was still active. According to an eyewitness account, the gunman would sing the lyrics to "Another One Bites the Dust" in between shots. The city's independent school district police had officers stationed at the school who exchanged fire with the suspect. One of the officers was wounded and subsequently hospitalized in critical condition. After firing into the ceramics room, the shooter was confronted by another school district officer as well as a Texas Highway Patrol trooper. Law enforcement attempted to persuade the gunman to surrender peacefully, but he continued shooting while arguing with the police. Eventually, the suspect was wounded, at which point he surrendered. In all, 10 people were killed and 13 others were injured as a result of the attack. The individual responsible, identified as a student at the school named Demetrius Pappas, was arrested and charged with multiple counts of capital murder and aggravated assault. As the investigation got underway, details regarding Pappas' problematic state of mind began to trickle out. He'd reportedly experienced repeated bullying at the hands of his classmates, with some fellow students labeling him a weird loner who never seemed right. Additionally, the parents of 16-year-old Shana Fisher, one of the 8 students slain in the shooting, publicly revealed that their daughter had rejected Pappas' advances on numerous occasions over the preceding months. They accused him of pestering Fisher to go on a date with him for 4 months before she finally stood up to him a week before the attack and implored him to stop. It's been theorized that Fisher's repeated rejection played at least a partial factor in Pappas' decision to target his classmates. The suspect was evaluated by multiple doctors, all of whom deemed him incompetent to stand trial. The next conference in connection with his competency was slated for May of 2023. Thanks for watching.